Okay, good. Um, all right, so I wanted to start out with a few things basically in this space. So, why are we here? There's no free lunch, so that's obviously not the reason. I don't know. Why are you here? No? You almost had an idea? Thoughts? You want to write better research papers. Okay, good. I might also maybe phrase that a bit as like you want to do better research papers. True. Good. Great. Yeah. Because if you're going to do this, and the writing process is always a tricky one to be able to get feedback on writing and have good groups that work together, things like that. Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. Collaborations are tricky because people are people. Uh, and we'll go through some examples of that today. Okay, good. Uh, Fantastic. So basically, in this process too, so this isn't entirely just about research, but grad school is it's a really weird and complex process because you essentially have to meld together two things, if not two, many more, but definitely two, at least in the research space. So everyone, at least for the most part, starts out as a student. And then what do you want to become after you're done doing grad school? Magician? No? Something like that? No ideas? Sorry? Professor? It's true. Yeah. Yeah, like if you really absolutely are totally into this, working at a job where basically nothing is written down and basically you always have to pretend like you know what you're doing, professorship is definitely for you. That's why I'm giving this. I like to pretend like I know what I'm doing, but I've got at least some experience. Uh, what about other things? Do you just like transform into a butterfly when you're done? Uh, Not quite, but what does that mean? Mhm. Yeah, but yeah. Thank you. Uh, but that's also a tricky thing because like how to think about problems. Everyone thinks about problems a bit differently, and that's important. But I guess a bit about today too, what we'll be talking about for like teamwork is, right, how can you at least get quick information about other people thinking about problems? You can pick and choose from these things that you think that'll work the best for you. These problems could be for writing, could be for research, um, they could be for doing teamwork. I don't know if people realize this or even the people in my lab, but the amount of thought I basically put into this entire process and how to craft a team that'll work together and cooperate is probably where I spend half of my time, basically, as my job. And it's as much as you can supply resources, well, how do you figure out how to get there? How do you even get those to happen? So it's kind of these two different steps. So you go from, at least at some point, going from a student to a professional, because at that point you've kind of figured out how to work with people, um, how to be dependable, how to do some of those things. So that's just like one chunk of this process, but also like this is grad school, like especially in machine learning. So this is also going to be like becoming a researcher. And this is a weird process, kind of what I was mentioning is like you need to be comfortable in working on the unknown, basically constantly. You don't know what the answer is. You've eliminated a lot of not good options, and you'll try the best two that you think you can accomplish before you retire, or something like that, and work down that. And it's basically you need to figure out how to put both of these two together. And the point I'm going to make today is that these two things are far more intertwined than you might think. Like if you want to learn technical skills, a lot of it has to do with people and teamwork skills because you're going to pick up information from other people. And the better you are at teamwork, the more information everyone is going to learn from each other. And this comes at least at some point when you're done, you become a professional researcher. So good at both of these things, can work on teams. Projects are not getting smaller these days for machine learning. So we have to become even better at working in teams than we used to from before. And then this is at some point you all become butterflies and out of the cocoon or whatever. And then basically you'll either join these huge teams or you'll start leading these teams. And those are very different things than like pursuing your own individual research, like technical minded stuff that doesn't involve other people. So basically, if goals are to become part of those things and lead teams or join them, you'll need, I mean, the people that are really successful are just as good at technical ability as they are in their teamwork. And that's where I'm happy I can at least cheat on this first one. All right, so Joshua reached a fantastic milestone last week on Tuesday or something with 1 million citations. How do we think that happened? How do you get to that stage? He's definitely really, really smart. I know plenty of people have heard him talk, but that's half of it. To be honest, I think that's actually less than half of his success. How do you get co-authorships? Got to be able to work with people. Can't be a total thorn in everyone's side on every cooperation, because then you probably won't be invited to the next one. Somehow Joshua has mastered a lot of these skills of continuously working with more and more people and like seeking his advice. And it's not just maybe part of the point. So this is going to be okay. Co-authorship is a good start. What else? That's not directly a mathematical skill that leads to this. Sorry? Popular field, true. How do you make a popular field? Do you think Mila exists just because machine learning is popular? Or is machine learning popular because Mila exists? Right. I'll put importance because I don't have as much screen space as I'd like right here. But like the importance, sort of like, how do you make a field popular? So you're gonna have to communicate why it's helpful. And not only helpful, extremely helpful at some point too. And now why you can basically turn almost any task into a machine learning problem. And that's a start. Most people will probably just be like, that's great, go away. I have to worry about my own priorities right now for the next 10 years and don't bother listening to professors very much. So what else do you think kind of led to this that isn't a direct technical skill? Hmm. How do you give good feedback? Not an easy intuition. Okay, but that comes from somewhere. Yeah. Hmm. Good. Okay. One of the things I was also trying to point in on this too is it's a lot about receiving feedback as well. So although like sure, Yashua's a great collaborator, probably, but because of all the collaboration, I'm guessing he also got an enormous amount of feedback himself. So it's understanding how to get feedback and apply that and what you learn from it. In addition, get feedback. Okay, great. So these are already some starts. I just want to make like a point of this is sort of sure this happened, but 10 years ago, basically, there's a thought of like, okay, but to get there, you need an enormous amount of resources. You need a team that'll work together because hardly any like machine learning problems are done by a single person anymore, which means you need to convince the government who has way more other priorities, which means you need to make friends with the government in order to be able to do these things on top of all the collaborators and somehow split your time 15 different ways every day. But basically, it wasn't just convincing other researchers. You had to convince an entire like community and government and world, I guess, at these points in order to be able to get to this. And none of and like 98% of those people don't care about your research. They're not doing technical things. So most of that work went into like non-technical things in order to get here. There's still a lot of combinations in being able to build skills. That'll help back to this. So we won't totally talk about how to convince the government to give us as much money, although that's what I do in my evenings. But we'll talk more at least about like local collaboration. But then a lot of these skills expand into things after. Like if you want to become going back, like join a team lead. I don't know, some people learned this recently. Okay. How's like success determined as part of these things when you become part of a team? You've got to like do things. You got to convince your manager to give you resources. Like right now, if you try to go work at DeepMind and you're not working on Gemini, good luck getting resources for your work. Like it's not just about just doing the research or having the technical ability. Still, to actually act on those things, you need enough resources to do it, which means convincing other people. Okay. All right. So now for more of the fun stuff. So what makes science happen? Does it just float around in the sky or something? We're just like, there it is, and then hand it out to everybody else? Good. That's part of the process. What is like the mechanical medium that causes science to occur? Maybe I'm being way too weird with this question right now. Good. Yeah. People, which is a great thing, a really challenging thing as well. So when you're thinking about scientific questions, like even when I'm considering some of them, is like, can people do this? So it's not like, is it even theoretically possible? It's like, do the mechanisms exist? Um, do I think people would be able to handle like this much fine-grained detail or some other weird aspects? It's more so, do I think I can convince, because I'm a professor these days, so I don't really have the time to do my own research, like individually. So it's more so, okay, can I convince some people to work on these things? But it's still always people that are doing it in all cases. And this is why it's really important to work with people. Each person has basically onto themselves, and everyone's talking about world model these days. So it's basically access to an entire world model worth of lived experience that can give you feedback on your research, which is great. And if science is basically, okay, we've found something where we agree that at least at this portion, our world models are the same for the most part, and to see if you can get people to agree on that. And this is why the feedback is definitely important. It's kind of like my world model says this. Does that agree with your world model? You go back and forth a whole bunch of times. If you don't agree, we'll figure out an experiment to run so at least one of you can be correct, and then you'll both have an aligned world model. But it's done through people. And this is a really challenging aspect too, if you're talking about world models, because it seems these days in different ways, like it's also, you need to craft like a space where people can collaborate, where people feel well enough basically in the space to actually offer their craziest ideas. Because the crazy ideas are the ones that usually make the best impact. And if people are like, oh, it's too busy right now, or most people agree on this other direction and they don't start offering these ideas, this is already like, okay, this will generally decrease the quality of the research in the entire area. So this is why partly about the space, but crafting like even the team and collaboration to be accepting of this and offering and open to all the new ideas is important. So then how can we create this space for people in different ways and be able to collaborate? And that's why it ends up getting tricky. But then so I'm going to start with this so we can be a little bit introspective. And we'll see how many people do some of this. So how many of you like actively try to craft a space to help you be more creative during like some time, maybe once a week or something like that? Do you do anything like that? You can't quite hear me? Oh, well, is that better? Okay, I'll try to use this thing. I'm not great at standing still. But like how many people basically on a regular basis try to craft like a space or a time that's just for you to think like clearly? Does that make any sense? You don't do anything like that? How do you ever find time to think? I mean, doing research is a lot of thinking. Okay, great. Lots of hands. I'm gonna pick Leia just because I'm doing whoever has an ask question first. Okay, it's good. It's not quite scheduled, which is okay, but at least it's sort of like when you're at critical points, you've got a tool to be like, okay, no, the brain is just not where it should be right now in order to come up with better problem solving strategies. Okay. What about others? So, hmm. Okay. So we've got shopping, walking. Oh, what other things help trigger ideas for people in the room? Hmm. Great. Don't always have access to another person, but it's helpful. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, good. Like as long as hopefully everyone's mental models of other people are nice people. But yes, uh, good. I mean, this is part of what I want to start out. Like first, let's think about ourselves and what helps us to a good point. So we're just team working with ourselves, basically, is what I'm trying to emphasize here. And then how much we can kind of grow this basically like mechanism onto additional people. But like shopping's great, walking. Like for me, I block off every morning of every day. This is like basically no meetings. I'll do whatever the heck I want so I can have thinking time. Reading papers definitely helps because usually I'm like, this paper is, that's all right. And I have a better idea and then I can go write that down. While reading about it. But what I'm going to start from now is I would also propose for a lot of people, like try to make this a regular thing. Maybe not like only when at a critical point, because then you still only meet a specific area for that critical point. This is also actually a very well documented thing, like in research or for critical thinking processes. There's at least a couple of people that say that there's like a two-phased mind. There's kind of like the detail-oriented stuff where you're doing things, you're basically like acting and exploiting. And at that point, you're not really thinking about how to change the plan, just on how to enact the plan. And otherwise, you kind of need to step back. I don't know, there's like a diffuse mind process or something like that. And that's more of like, okay, ideas can come in and out. You're not thinking about exactly how to do something right now, but just kind of going back and forth. You can go and read this book called Thinking uh, Fast and Slow. I think it's actually Slow and Fast. And I might, is it Fast and Slow? Okay. There's a lot of other examples, but it just means like if part of the research process is also making sure you have good ideas, which also helps attract other collaborators because they'll have other ideas and things like that to build on it, try to in-build like some of this stuff into your schedule as well. Like for me on Wednesday evenings, because I'm done teaching for the week, is usually the best time for me to do this. I also go like hiking and other stuff on the weekend that gets me as far as humanly possible from email, because I find that's usually the death of any creative thought. That also really helps us places for me. And everyone's going to have something that's a bit different, but definitely try to find this. You definitely need to have some space so that only your thoughts exist, far away from social media where it's feeding you constantly other things that they want you to think, just for you and your own brain, because that's probably like some of the most valuable things that the world will get from you and you'll get from yourself. Yeah. Yeah, good. Because like writing is a good way of thinking because it's still you. Hopefully not some AI assisted writing thing or some other thing that might also kind of interfere with what is just your thoughts as a way to come up with it. Okay. All right, let's see how this goes. Uh, let's do an exercise for a second, but maybe in this case, just like whoever you're sitting next to, it's fine if you do like groups of two or three. I know some people gave some examples, but like just try to like chat for a minute. Now we're getting into the teamwork phase where we're going to share our thoughts with each other on just how we craft these spaces to help us think. So let's do this for like 5 minutes and I'll come around and give some details. But and then maybe if you know the person next to you really well, maybe also try chatting with someone else so you get a bit more variety. Uh, and the people online, I'm not entirely sure how to do rooms, but I'll try to do that in a second while people are grouping together. Okay, let's do this as our first practice in teamwork. You're now sitting with someone you haven't talked to too much about a topic you probably never shared. Have a chat. Okay, I can't at all figure out how to get breakout rooms to work on my tablet. So maybe the online group here is welcome just to share as group all together. So who would like to go first on thoughts on how you can make some space to make sure that for yourself you can also get some time to think? Okay, now I'm unmuted. Some people online might have missed my slightly long kind of discussion about just do things. Basically, don't worry about breaking things. Don't worry about might happen or not happen. In fact, most things are out of your control completely, so who cares? Like there's going to be another STM strike next month in like a week or something. Oh well, you can't do anything about it. I'll have to figure out how to adjust my class. Who cares? We'll work it out. Those things just happen in life, whether or not you can control them. Just go and make the best of whatever else you can do. Okay. All right. So we learned how to talk with others. Very good skill to start out with. And to basically share this idea, to figure out how to find some space to clear your mind, think about big ideas. Has anyone seen the Lego movie? Here as an example. No. Okay. Well, there's this part where Emmett, the main character, not fantastically bright, apparently, but because he has a perfectly clear mind that is empty of pretty much any of the other concerns that we all probably spend all of our like mental capacity on, he gets to come up with really crazy ideas that other people wouldn't think of. This double-decker couch is a weird example from the movie, but it does end up being useful at some point in the movie. Go watch it to figure it out. But it's like this type of stuff that helps. So make sure you can find some time to always reach this space. Because good gosh, I mean, the amount of garbage out there that doesn't really need to be thought out, quite big. Just find some time to think about stuff yourself. Okay. So now we're going to have a hopefully fun exploration into the first thing that's kind of based on teamwork. And I figured this is a good way to get people to think about other people. So, and this incredibly delicate question. So, when is the best time to have a meeting? If you're going to book a meeting with another human being, when is the best time to do that? Immediately after. Okay. Why? Uh, what if lunch makes me sleepy? I decided to. Oh, okay. Few minutes. Okay. Well, that's good. So you're also thinking, so there's a bit about the human condition here. It's like they're fed, which is probably a good time. Okay. So you're also saying, like even some active meeting, like there's sort of a time, like an event that triggers the meeting. Okay. Yeah, you can definitely have some weird event triggered. Sorry, not that they're weird, but there are certain things where just like you run into like a situation. It's like, okay, maybe that is the time to have a meeting. So maybe not always just after lunch, but again, we're getting down a good path. A bit of both. So like, that's the part of the process is for starting out for doing some teamwork. When is the best time to almost have this teamwork or what it would be a meeting? Time can be anything here, really. Face tired, fatigued. Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting comment as well because there's like in the morning you're fresh, at least hopefully if you got a good sleep, but maybe as fresh as you will be that day. But there's a cost for like mentally storing energy, like the energy cost of storing whatever the context of that meeting is going to be for longer and longer. There's sort of a different the other way of thinking about that is okay, as time goes on, when that next meeting happens, more of the initial part of that meeting will be spent just reminding people what they're meeting for. Uh, Okay. Other thoughts? Hmm. Okay. Uh, sorry. Yeah, it's like when there's it's not, we're not confident enough in the next decision to be made, basically, or some of the plans. Good. Uh, Anything else? True. Oh, against most of these? No. I mean, I do for myself, I book weekly meetings, but I also have like a link where anyone can book basically anytime, and I have free time every day. So people are always welcome to book extra time, especially if you don't, a version of this, like maybe you didn't get quite enough time in the last meeting. So then book another one, something like that. And that becomes a very active process. I will honestly say, though, the amount of times that happened since I've started being a prof, I could probably count on one hand of mine, I think. Maybe, no, I think it's maybe happened a little bit more lately. But it's also to remind people. So this is a much more meta level comment. Great. So like feel free to ask questions too about these more critical things or stuff that isn't quite covered. But it goes the other way. It's like, okay, well, I need to check in on people, see how they're doing. Maybe they don't know that they're not totally confident about what they should be doing next. So if a totally untrained person is left to only book event-based things, how will they know that they need to book a meeting and that things are unclear? So you can't just leave threads totally unmonitored. You'll never know what they'll end up doing. Yeah. Uh, Sometimes, but I find so the hopefully the people that are on the other end of this, and I think this is even like the next slide or the one after it. Oh, okay. Well, I wrote a bunch of stuff. Uh, in the beginning or whatever, it's always fine to have more meetings. And if people don't have time, hopefully everyone will eventually in here become pretty good at time management and be like, we don't yet need to have a meeting about that topic and maybe give it a few days. So you'll hopefully become a little bit better at even managing your time with a team because we got to do stuff in order to like support the team. Meetings are helpful. I don't spend a lot of time like pair coding with people in my meetings for getting things done, but we do a lot of planning and going over things. So it depends, and I'll get to this in a few slides where actually I would say you should just go ahead and request meetings. Like I've got these extra meeting slots. It's up to me whether or not if you request something to me and I'd be like, no, actually don't have time for that day. I have to finish my slides for the workshop that I said I'd be doing tomorrow after I already finished the midterm last night. So I have no extra time in that like 8 hour chunk. So don't worry about it. Like again, if you don't make the request, then the other option is okay, you might spend a week doing weird stuff or something like that that's not aligned with the person you end up wanting to meet with. So it can't hurt. At the very least, you get a response. Be like, okay, don't have that time. Can you exchange a message right now just so we can make sure to cover some portion of this? So at least we're aligned up until the next time we definitely can have a meeting. You almost always better to reach out. I think actually always better. No almost on that one. Okay, great. Like these are all good. It's good to think about this process. I mean, there are also like there's a huge amount of research on this too, and like when people are most malleable and best time to work with. Maybe a good tip just while we're here. What is the best day to ask for a raise? Does anyone know that one? Yeah, like a raise, a salary increase. When you get hired, you should do it before you get hired, like during the offering process. Yeah, yeah. If you're working, so when you're doing that process, apparently like the best time is on a Wednesday just after lunch is the time your managers are past all of the garbage where they're like have a good like the garbage in the beginning of the week because whatever happened on the weekend that caught on fire. And before getting to the weekend, because they're probably planning for the weekend and other stuff, Wednesday is the time, apparently statistically, when people ask, they're more likely to get a raise from a manager. So also try to book your like performance reviews then too. A lot of these things are very careful. In fact, I did. a weak version of performance reviews with my students this year. And one of the tricks I also used was actually walking. People are more flexible and get a little bit out of their own typical brain zone, and are more willing to take on information and also offer new ideas when they're walking. And if they are in my typical office space where it's always just about like, what's the math right now? It's not quite the same environment. Okay, so I wrote over all of these, but morning, afternoon, evening are also good. Uh, and it's also tricky because you definitely got a couple of the good details down. There's definitely some other priorities. Like I gave the example, I've got to write some slides so that maybe there's some other things to adjust. But as you become a good team and the teamwork happens, you kind of anticipate these things. Like at least I hope at this point, I won't quiz anybody right now, but like, like when does Glenn teach? He'll probably have to edit his slides the time before that and have a little bit less time. And then like when do other people have their classes? So you have to adjust around that as well. I think this says when they are fresh, even though it's a little bit covered up. And also what do they have to do in that day? So like if they already had two midterms that day, maybe meet a different day. They might be tired, or maybe they're one of those off weird people that like finally midterms are done, definitely want to think about other stuff, and maybe they do want to meet immediately. Okay, all right. So now here's maybe at least one or more of the contentious topics. So should the meeting cover all possible topics? Uh, I don't know how to erase with this thing, so I apologize for that. Oh, eraser. No. Okay, erase all. It's in the video later, so you can go and see the things that we wrote, but most of the stuff is what we've covered here. At least, in my opinion, and there's a lot of research on like different types of meetings. At least in a meeting, not every topic makes the most sense to have during that meeting. I at least like to give this example. And for me, they shouldn't cover all topics. And actually, I don't like to finish meetings. If we finish meetings, then we somehow covered everything possible. But if you're like a believer in economics, over time, there's usually diminishing returns. So stuff at the end of the meeting is usually less important. So it can possibly wait till later. It can possibly just be a conversation on Slack. And it's less time we get to spend planning the research because we have no idea what we're doing again, because we're doing research. So we need to spend as much time planning as we can. And to be honest, I guess these days, like some of this stuff, like figuring out when to book a new meeting, like AI does this better than people do. To be honest, like people are not fantastic at planning. So having some online scheduling system is usually faster than people can manage to book and converse back and forth to find a good time. Besides, everyone just basically pulls out their calendar. Well, at least professors do. I guess Roger isn't here right now, but like he was booking his pre-doc and it took us 2 weeks. It involved like 4 different assistants and like 7 different options. But it's just like using AI would probably do this faster. So you got to watch out for these things. So that's why, so some of those, we probably would have spent that entire meeting with the whole group just figuring out how to plan this and no other research, but we could handle it all offline. So this is at least me. So if you're kind of thinking, I don't know, in the meeting, and then as time goes on, this does kind of tend to fall off. Also because at, at the later point in the meeting, the planning here tends to be planned for further and further into the future. And it's just less likely that as you plan further into the future, that future is going to be what you think it's going to be. So at some point, kind of planning beyond 2 weeks is kind of a bit of a risky endeavor these days. Like after 2 weeks, like the research might be done, or someone might have posted another thing or whatever, or the class might be over. A lot could have changed in 2 weeks. So it's tricky to try to plan that far into the future. And I do this on different levels. Some amount I plan for the next 40 years. That might or may not change, but most of the planning is kind of with a nice discount factor kind of going up until like the next 2 or 3 weeks to focus on that. Also, because in this chart, you run a bunch of experiments for a week, that might have changed all those plans anyway, because you discover something awesome. So planning that far in the future can definitely be tricky. Does that make sense? Yeah. There's also I don't know, there's even plenty of math theory on this stuff too. Like if you're trying to plan into the future, it's exponentially hard. If you make a mistake, it accumulates really fast, and mistakes are more likely the further you try to plan. So it's just kind of you're fighting against people, the universe, and mathematics to try to plan really far into the future. Okay. Oh yeah, that's just this example. Some things could maybe be used for email. Don't worry about that. So it's also because in the like the teamwork sense, you're trying to talk about the teamwork stuff there too. Other things like emails and planning, they're a bit helpful, but you don't always know when you're going to meet next. Maybe use some AI system. And for me, I don't know my schedule too well, so using email is faster because I have a tool where I just like click, it suggests what time I'm available. I select one of those and I send it. Otherwise, it takes me longer to do it, like actually in person. Okay, so this is also a bit related to this topic as well. If you're in a meeting or you're discussing stuff with your team and you're doing things like that, and the point I'm trying to make here, like this, I don't know, is time t equals zero. It's like it's the now. There are different things you can talk about during a meeting, and when you're thinking about trying to synchronize with your team, basically, and come up with stuff, where should most of the conversation exist on this time frame? If this is like past, and this is time, and this is future. Okay, Jesse first, just because now I'm doing UCB on people. Why is that less productive? Hmm. Yeah. Does that make sense? Any comments on the? Hmm. Yeah, because it can also be an easier way to share information. Well, okay. It's also because possibly in the last meeting you ended up with a plan, and from that it's sort of there might have been a few bits of information that were learned, but then it's like, did those affect the plan? Because like the last mental concept maybe is sort of like what was the plan and to-dos, and we just want to see is that changing stuff for the next bit of future. And then like when those things come up from the stuff in the past, then you can explain, okay, that's changing this part of the plan. So we're still thinking into the future. Yeah. Is that any other thoughts, comments? Interesting. So at least from my point of view, I don't classify any of that stuff as in the past. If you're talking about why we're doing the project or something like that, I guess I think of that's like way up here. Like, what's the goal we're trying to reach at the end? It's like that's the thing that we're trying to make happen in the somewhat distant future. It's not so much as it's the thing we discussed and kind of like been shelved and left there. It's like the thing we need to revisit pretty often. We can't in detail because it's far into the future, so a bit fuzzy. But it's the thing we're attempting to steer towards, like swim towards. Mhm. Good. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? Yeah. like in this case, like I know you do more causality research. So it's also like if you can package, if you're even talking about stuff over here, it's like, okay, I changed this thing, but it's because I'm going to package this causal information I found really quick and be like, this is what we learned. And that's why this has changed up here and that. And that's kind of, I mean, that's basically what science is, kind of in like a short description. It's like, did a bunch of stuff, found what I think is this rule, and I'm hoping that it's true, or basically it seems to have a higher probability than before, and then maybe adjust the plan based on that. And that's, yeah, good for doing agent design. Okay, great. So this is a good background for like figuring out to seek information. So then maybe also just to add an extra point, it was brought up good in the beginning because this is, I don't know, depending on what you're meeting and doing this stuff. I know a lot of you are talking about collaborators, and even for people that are like more or less senior or whatever, like it is tricky to talk about much that was in the past because you can't do a lot about it. You want to summarize it kind of as quick as possible or talk about it when it becomes important for scheduling stuff or planning for things into the future. I guess it's also because if you're chatting with other people, well, it's also partly that like the most difficult thing to do is to plan. So then, like, if you have the time to talk to another person, you should likely spend it on planning to see whether or not you can agree on some sort of plan and some sort of priority. If you're talking about stuff in the past, that's good. I mean, at some point it ends up being helpful, but again, it also feels it doesn't get people as active in the process. So like in some ways, if you're trying to like encourage and motivate people, be like, no, and you want to make them feel like they're part of the planning process and they're actively doing this stuff and actively coming up with a plan for the things that you will do. If you spend more time in the future, they actually feel more like they're helping and that they will be a part of this. So they're collaborating with people. It's like, okay, this is what we're going to do together in the future, and we're working together. What's more stuff in the past, and it's like, I guess we can give some feedback on that, but it's very much like focused on whatever that individual did, and it's hard to, I guess, like have this lens on stuff. And that's where, for me, a lot of the times where collaborations go the best is where like all team members feel like they're part of the team. They're all part of the planning process. They're all taking a chunk of this in one way or another and contributing to whatever this plan is. And then, yeah, sure, summarizing whatever worked or didn't work. You definitely need both, even though I know we only really publish on the stuff that worked. But real research requires on knowing all the stuff that didn't work, because you're just learning what doesn't work. And that's the stuff that you just don't want to try as much in the future. And then the things that work is what we share. Because it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that worked. Otherwise. Yeah. hmm Yeah. So there's two angles on this. One is so if, and kind of part of the goal for having the part of the meeting time or whatever your actual discussion time is more for the planning stage. So then like you'll have agreed on a lot of options already. So it's easier for you to predict other people's like forward function and what they would do if they were in that situation. So like as we spend more time in this space, then we'll start to learn more about not, ideas and what they get done, because all I can really say or someone can say is like, I would have done that or I would have not, or yes or no. Here, it's nice because you also get to spend some time in this mental space of like, okay, how are other people planning this process? So you start to understand more about their like meta thinking process to understand their own plan. And to be really honest, if you're like a student, at least interacting with your supervisor, this is what you're probably most here to learn. Like, how are they going to go about this fuzzy research process? What like gotchas or hurdles are they going to worry about even in that technical area? So you can pick that up and then you'll agree on a lot of these more. Because you can go and read textbooks and stuff and other papers for all the stuff over here that's been done and things like that. The stuff over here that's, I guess, on my right, yeah, also your right is kind of figuring out. So that'll help for like half of this. So that hopefully you figure out how to align more and more as people and teams spend more time on this process. Um, the other part then it just kind of comes from intuition. Like I would say, like take the initiative. Eventually, everyone in here is going to learn to lead their own research and go on to other stuff after grad school. So you should learn to also just go with it, take the initiative. You can send a message. That part will be later on some of those details, just saying like, this is the plan. How does this sound, considering everything we've talked about? And I found this other paper 2 days later, so I might make this adjustment. So it's just good. You're trying to still keep those people feeling like they're part of the plan and they know what's going on. I mean, be careful about going too far outside of this planned conversation. That can have a rather large negative effect because then it's sort of like, well, I thought we had a meeting where we talked about a plan, and then one of your teammates goes to do something not that plan, and your future work was also dependent on what they were going to do. So now it's like, I don't know whether or not like our meeting conversations are going to lead to stuff because we align on what should be done. So if you think it's going to go like far outside of the plan, definitely like try and have a meeting or a discussion to see what it is, just to make sure you keep realigning. And this is going to be good on any team. Like if you've got a manager later and they're paying you a lot, so that other time there is like not used towards whatever the heck the plan was, it'll be a bit confusing for them on how that goes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good on this slide. I think we're going to cover a few more of these in detail. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. I'm trying to still make this a pretty open conversation. I'll be as honest as I can without getting into really bad trouble. So it goes. Okay. So so basically do always make sure to have a reason for a meeting, like coming to it with some plan. So at least to figure out, okay, whatever, these two things are on fire. They need to be talked about first, whatever they might end up being. That's always good. And then figure out, at least in this, like what kind of information is also going to be sought. Like probably, like at least in my case, you don't want to have a meeting with me and talk about basketball. I know nothing about it. I'm terrible. So like when you talk to different people and you have a team and you're doing collaborations, each of them will have different skills. Like you might do co-supervision and stuff too. It's because, well, okay, the research direction is a melding of these two things that hasn't actually been done, and you'll probably ask different questions to those people, and you'll also consider collaborators because actually there's this other chunk that might be a good part of the project, but no one in the group has experience for this thing. So who would you want, or what type of person would you want in that meeting to be able to answer those questions? And then, maybe you can find someone who does that, or maybe you have to learn it on your own. Depends on the situation. Um, and then also think about this. I mean, it's true, like people do want to help and contribute to this always. And then just some people can help with certain topics more than others. Okay. The part that I also want to be able to talk about too, there's been a few questions about this, is how to use this time. So, should we be worried about meeting time? I forgot to put animations on this, so I've kind of revealed a lot of this slide already. The short answer is no. Like you had kind of already asked about whether or not there's too many meetings. Don't worry about it, to be honest. At least not with the people you're working with. You can reflect it on yourself whether or not you think the meeting times are productive for the things that you do. But I would hope other people should just make time, do teamwork, talk. It's there. Try and get access to it. Use it as much as you can. And especially like if they've agreed or whoever you're working with has got time for that meeting, use that time as much as you can and like make good use of it. Don't worry about like apologizing or things like that. I even got the point on the bottom. I was like especially for people around the world and also like for people here at Mila and like people you collaborate with, they probably really want to do things, which means like that often means like going a bit fast, not always worrying about like I guess I assume after interacting very often, okay, like I know you're not trying to kill everybody or something like that, I'd hope. So you're probably on my team. So you only really need to apologize if something bad happens. Does everyone know the saying of ask for forgiveness, not for permission? Just go ahead and do stuff. That's kind of, yeah, an example of your question of figuring out alignment and changing ideas. Just like go do it. Who knows what you'll end up discovering most of the time. But if we're always asking for permission, nothing ever gets done. It's okay, don't share this with my school or Quebec. But it's like the first thing I've really learned, to be very make much more progress in Quebec is I basically ignore all the rules I possibly can. If I followed them, I'd never get anything done ever. So I just find creative ways to get around them instead. Helps me work on those planning aspects I talked about from before, and I get way more done. And don't worry about overusing this time. Feel free to use it. I mean, trust me, if you start to spend more time in this space and planning, people will be more interested in giving time anyway, because everyone wants to do research and do interesting stuff and get involved in the things that they like. So trust me, you'll get more time that way anyway. That's why you can always request more time. It's up to them whether or not, they don't have the time for it or they've got other priorities for that day. So like don't assume someone else's world model of their priorities. And the last part I like to know is like it's also good because people should learn how to say no. If you're gonna do research, you have to learn how to say no. There'll be way too many ideas, probably a lot of different types of collaborations, things like that. It's an important skill to learn how to say no. Like you need to say no to find time to think about stuff and have that free time as well. So practice that skill. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions? You're allowed to say no to all of this and say, Glenn, you're crazy. No, no thoughts? Sure. Yeah. I mean, if I'm going to help set at least for myself, but I think this is the same for most people at Mila, like the way I think of my research and the students is if I had the time, I'd be doing it myself. I don't. But that means like I am that interested. I wish I could devote my time to doing the project myself. And I'm super interested to figure out whatever they figured out over the past time since last time I met them. So like whatever you figure out in that experience and process and summarizing it is useful. So it's sort of like without these meetings and groups, you do no research, and then this job is pretty boring and hollow. So you definitely want those things to go well. So just live the process, I guess. But definitely don't worry about, I don't know, meeting times or anything like that. People will figure out how to budget what they can. Okay, and then also this part, yeah, ask for forgiveness part. Also, like I was saying in the beginning, this is where I also want students to learn to break things in the beginning so they go and try stuff that they might have not tried elsewhere and not to be too worried. Like if you're always worried you're going to break stuff, you're not going to try those really interesting research ideas anyway. So even for me, like I'm a robotics person. I don't care if my students break robots. They should. If they're not getting broken, they're not getting used. And the lab, it can get broken too. Sure, the department will get annoyed, but they probably won't notice. So who cares? No one ever comes up to my lab from the department. Uh, okay. Okay. Good though. Any other crazy questions? Or all right, I'll keep going through some stuff anyway. So this is also this I was getting to. Yeah, because this is quite literally the life. And I'm sure I'm going to underline profs for now, but I hope you all realize this is going to be you in the near future, if not already, as in like an absolute barrage of stuff coming at you, and you're trying to sort through the amount of information and noise in the universe so you can get back to meeting with your students and doing research. And they take time for a lot of these things, so don't worry about it. It's true if you're like doing collaborations with people that are more senior or whatever. Again, if they're giving the time, just take it and use it and don't worry about anything else. But it's also something to consider maybe when doing these meeting times or thinking about the absolute insane life that sort of comes along with the process. Okay, good. Um, and then, like I was saying, if people are making the time for these connections, they end up being very informative, so they'll learn more from it. Most profs are all nerds that just want to learn more and more things, so they'd be happy to talk more about what you've learned. Okay. Does that make sense? For some reason, I thought this was controversial. Profs aren't busy. Well, they're busy, but they're busy with a bunch of stuff that you would not imagine how stupid it is. Like actually, the amount of phishing scams I get attacked with every day has grown quite a bit since like I started being a prof and things like that. So it's like that's not the students, to be honest. It's usually like requests to give talks. I do robotics. It's like, okay, I want to buy a robot. I was like, okay, but you can't buy it from there. Also, it can't be that much. Also, you have to change the quote for the third time. It's all of this junk that I wish wasn't there. Okay, go on. Some people do make it feel like it's very precious. Sure. Hmm. Yeah, it happens quite often. Hmm. Bigger question is maybe what to do in those situations. They've still agreed to give the time, so they should just suck it up and help. Would be my current comments on that. And this can even happen for anybody. I'm sure I've done this a few times too, because some days just suck uh, for some of these things and they become a little less great. But the process is still to be able to figure out how to do this. Like if you've got the time, like we might as well use it as we can where you've got that actual discussion and can do it. And if they really don't have the time, they should have said that beforehand. So if anything, I don't know, they're making like three of their own mistakes beforehand before anyone else is using some of that time. So it's not any particular person's fault that their schedule is full except for that person. Sure. Just be like, we're here to talk. It's like, I'd like to get into this. I've got some really complicated problems. I would also pretty much ignore that problem as well as I wouldn't care as much if they're busy or whatever like that. I'd just go right into what I want to discuss and just ignore their, I don't know, preferences or priorities because it's just going to waste more time during the meeting. Uh, if you want, yeah, at some point you can try and confront it more, but this would be my way of saying like I'm already ignoring your current issues, and this is what we're supposed to be doing. It's maybe not perfect for teamwork, but the reason why this might help in the future is okay. At some point, the teamwork will grow, the collaboration will grow, and through this process of doing more discussion and getting into details, like the time to them might then seem like it's being used more. It's also, I don't know, in this particular case, but it's part of their job. So partly I don't care. They're getting paid for it. But I find in practice, the best way to go about this is to, it's like not technically ignore it, but then just like, or like totally pretend it doesn't exist. But just to go on is like, okay, but the point is these people are interested in doing research, like all of us here, and making some impact and hopefully like positive impact and things like that. So if it becomes more like that, because I know it can become challenging as like a few of these meetings happen. And then the people that are in the meeting are already discouraged. This is no longer a space to have great creative thought and do research. So the only way you can try to be a bit proactive and try to make it that space, even in spite of the other person for a little while, see how that goes. If that really doesn't go, well, then maybe they should be doing a different job, something like that. Help a little. Okay. It's also, yeah, same. Like I've got senior people above me that don't want to have to deal with me too much, especially when I'm asking to install hardware and stuff like that, but it is part of their job. Okay, good. Other questions? All right. And this, okay, this actually goes a bit into that last comment as well. The thing that usually helps a lot in like building on this and having good teamwork uh, is becoming predictable. I mean that in like a good way and sort of like the planning and organization and teamwork and a bit dependable. I can give this example, like becoming a good source of knowledge. So at least I think everyone in the room or whatever, and can like picture a person in your mind that's like a researcher that like is, I don't know, constantly putting out good research. You go to seek out their information whenever they do stuff. And it's because, okay, their research seems top quality. What they're doing is related to what you're doing. And they become this person that you'd probably be happy to collaborate with if you're not already. And then because of that, like through that process, like they do become good to collaborate with. And a lot of what we're building on is to figure out, okay, how to learn to do that type of thing. And then this helps even in those maybe sort of rough, situations when you're trying to come up with collaborators and teamwork. If you can just somehow also like slowly start to incorporate this into the way things go. So this is just like even on a weekly basis, it's kind of related to if you've planned things together really well and act on a lot of those plans that happen with your collaborators, then okay, you start to become like dependable because it seems like you're actually aligned on what should be done. And then as more information is generated, like the meeting is important because they need that knowledge to act on what they're doing next. Whether that's like the more local example instead of having like a ideal researcher that you've been thinking about that you get knowledge from. But the idea is you all will become these in the community. So you might as well act like it immediately because it's just you are. I know it's sometimes tricky to get past a few of those steps. And I know it's challenging because there's so many things going on. And sometimes it feels like you're not making as much progress as you can or whatever. None of that stuff really matters. Again, you can't do anything about anything in the past. Just think, okay, how do I become this stronger source of knowledge like right now? Like just keep planning for that. Figure out how to generate more information, figure out how to share more information. Can't do anything about what's in the past. Kind of like, okay, if something breaks in my lab, I'm not even going to care at all what was broken or what was going to happen. Just call the janitor people, they'll come fix it. We've broken a lot of stuff in my lab, and let's just figure out what to do next. Generate more information, and just hopefully no one got hurt. And that's it. And that's where it's sort of figure out how to do a lot of this, like making good plans with people so that um, you're aligned on the plans, acting on those plans together, sharing some information, summarizing what was gained, repeat. This is basically to everything in a very short, pretty vague box. Hopefully it makes some sense. Does that make sense here? It's also like why people collaborate with other people, like why Joshua gets so many collaborations. Okay, it's pretty predictable in what he's doing. He voices his opinion pretty often on what he's got planned. It's not a surprise what he's doing at all. Most people here can probably work out what he's going to be doing for the next year, not on a day-to-day basis, but the general idea. I would hope my students also think the same thing of me, or I've been doing a bad job communicating what's going on. Possibly, if not most of the time. So I guess, yeah, like a lot of the question is just to figure out, or like the challenging aspect of sure, the more senior people might have ideas and try to steer things a lot. In fact, I know like, yeah, one of Joshua's things, which I think is pretty smart, which is like he's got plenty of people he's collaborating with, and he just sort of says, okay, the people who work on the things that he's interested in will get more of his time. And that's true of everything, hopefully. People realize like he might say that, but like even in practice implicitly, like if people get more time with working with each other because they're interested in the same ideas. I can't go work on like curing cancer or something right now because I know nothing about it. I also am terrible at chemistry, so I wouldn't go up with it either. Okay, it also gets to a more delicate subject that I don't think I'm covering in here. At least anything in particular important is that a lot of times people don't always say what they mean. So occasionally people will be saying things in order to get them to do other stuff. In fact, it's very difficult to tell whether or not someone's just not being entirely clear or they've got something else in mind. Like it might be the case, like this is a great idea now, but like I can't give some students the details, but I know I just had discussions with a couple of companies and like the government, and what they're going to be interested in like the next 2 years is going to be this topic. And I'm like, I know there's a current project we're working on for this week, but I also really want my students to get jobs. So I might try to steer them towards those topics so they have a great fun time during the PhD and after. So it depends. I guess you'd hope that if you have enough alignment and cohesion in your teamwork, you'd have some trust in that person and like the direction that they're giving, and they're not just totally being crazy or trying to steer stuff for no good reason. There might be some people that are definitely trying to steer stuff for no good reason. They already have too much money, and we should probably avoid them as much as we can. You know, hopefully that helps a little. Yeah. So it's tricky, and I know like with me and my students too, we're always trying to negotiate their projects, and I'm always trying to nudge them to some things as well, just so that they learn more and have more impact. Or I don't know, maybe some things are just hard. There's a lot of things that could be going on. It could also be, in some cases, working with the student after a little while. It can be, all right, well, we've gotten this far, and there's been like a mental like assessment of skills and progress so far, and like maybe it would be good to adjust direction for different reasons. Yeah. Or it's just sort of, well, I didn't get the grant that gives us $50 million in compute that we had planned in this project, so maybe we need to adjust our plans a little as well. Okay, great. All right, so I think a little bit about this learning how, which is next. Okay, this one. This kind of goes a little bit towards like the making meetings and coming up with time and like always booking a meeting because you never will know what happened. Just like basically, when should we ask a question in a meeting, in this workshop? The short answer is always. We can, I'm going to cover up the stuff on the bottom for right now. Oh, okay, how many people know a little bit about reinforcement learning or causality? Okay, probably enough. One of the key aspects of reinforcement learning is the agent can only learn stuff if it does stuff itself and takes actions or questions or any sort of interventions in the world. So what I'm mostly trying to say is like mathematically, an agent can never learn how to act in the world if it never asks questions or does actions. So if you don't ask your question, I guess or if anyone doesn't ask a question, you can just sort of assume, okay, they'll never figure out the answer for that for their world model. And going to like read it and stuff on the internet is still not quite the same as like asking that question. You need to learn from your own active feedback. Where are the holes? Like the agent needs to learn in their own active feedback to find the holes in their own world model. Other people can't do it for you. As much as teachers try, but it's mostly we get to do this and be like, ask questions whenever this model of the world doesn't agree with your model so we can sort out the differences. Um, and that's why I say like always, that's new. Probably shouldn't have done that. Great. And then you can always, and don't worry about bothering others. I mean, they've also agreed to be students in the room, so feel free to take that time. Every single time, too, there's someone else in the room who didn't quite want to ask the question anyway. So almost always when you ask a question, you're helping more than yourself. And this is where the real interesting part comes in, though. So we learned that we need to ask questions, a bunch of causal structure stuff, which is also very helpful. So make sure to ask these questions. There's also a little bit of this too, because we do need to act. There's also a point in the life or in the process where too much thinking can be bad. You need to collect data in order to keep informing the thinking. So it does mean like go do some stuff, exploit for a little while after even taking some of these actions. Um, and the real important part though is that the reason why this will also help is we can improve our question asking skills. And research is basically the process of figuring out how to ask good questions. So we got to start out by just asking questions, then slowly building up our skills and asking questions so you get like to the information you want, like clearer and faster. Like this is basically like prompt engineering with the world to get the information you want as clear as you can. And this is really what grad school is, figuring out how to ask questions clearer, better, collect the data for them, then broaden the size of your questions given the skills and interests you have. Yeah. Does that make sense? And then hopefully think really, really big so you can do some fun stuff. Can you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you over the AC. Sorry, what was the last part? Self-assess what? What is a good question? I mean, the individual is the person that gets to self-assess whether or not it's a good question, because I guess it's a good question if it's helpful for you to gather information about the thing you're trying to do. So like, it's not, questions aren't judged by other people or something like that. I mean, the information that might result from the question will be shared in the community, and that's fine. And depending on the interests of the community, which I'd be careful about, like using that as a way to direct your entire life is important, but shouldn't be too much of a consideration. The other part that you're asking about, though, is okay, like figuring out how to ask a question. This is all about kind of like everything that was covered in the slides previously, like kind of like knowing other people, knowing what their skills are in the background, and whether or not they'd be able to answer your question, how detailed you have to give that question, things like that. So it's just kind of like a two process here. It's like you've got your question. Um, you need to assess the skills of the other person for what level you can ask that question at. Like you and I can talk about RL, sure, but I can't do that with like my mother. Trust me, but I haven't really tried in the last couple of years. Let's just say I tried earlier when I didn't know as much about RL. So you make sort of these adjustments, and you'd ask a different type of question or go to a different type of person. But it also shows that you actually like care about the other person and their thoughts. I didn't get as much time to like go around in the team discussions, but one process to do there to figure out like how other people are managing their open-minded time is like asking other people what they do, like actually looking and being interested in what their process is so that you know a little bit about them. The other part after that, though, that's kind of all skill. Just because typically we're asking questions about stuff that's a bit unknown. So it's not easy to figure out how to ask those questions. I know it's hard, and it's why meetings and spending a lot of the meeting time on planning, because it's basically asking questions back and forth about an object we don't understand that doesn't exist yet. Uh, and it just goes back and forth. But this is like a really important skill. That's not a, like it's not necessarily, it's partly a technical skill because you have to have some technical skills, but it's also partly a way of figuring out how to get like information out of other people. Where it's like sometimes, I don't know, you can do examples of this. I do this a lot when I communicate with people of, there was an example really recently where I'm trying to have it come to my mind, where like when you ask a question, it actually answers four or five things. Where I can be like, is the sky outside blue? Sure, you can get a yes or a no answer, but instead I can implicitly ask many questions at once, just being like, at least like with a friend of mine, hey, do you want to go for a walk outside today? I learned that, okay, they're only going to do that if the weather outside is going to be nice. So that already answers the other question, whether or not they're interested in talking to me right now or things like that, or if they're busy for that day. So that thing actually answers about four questions all at once, rather than kind of starting from the beginning. It's like, I'm going to assess with them whether or not all the conditions are correct for me to be able to go outside. Let's just ask the question right to it, and you get all those answers immediately. So I'd probably say like start out knowing, like going in, assuming more background knowledge from the person, and then going in it for that. But also, it can't be related to anything that only the person knows. So I can't be like, I don't know, what do you think of my French tutor? It's probably not going to be as helpful as like I'm the only one who has that lived experience for how that goes. So if asking questions usually means that you know a bit about the person and they likely have some lived experience about this particular situation. So hopefully that helps a little. I know it's still hard, and that's why research is hard and why it still involves a lot of communication. Okay. Uh, yeah, I got into this for a little bit, figuring out where a project should start. Ah, right. The idea phase. There's basically a challenge. We're coming up with some project. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I have a slide later, but I'd recommend doing maybe a little bit of extra reading on this type of thing. I mean, just start a project. I mean, I've done entire projects in like 4 days. They were much easier than like machine learning projects where I didn't have to train anything for that project. But like anything can be a project and it can start anywhere. Um, okay, I'll just leave that here for now because I've got something to in 2 slides that I'll get to that's a bit more about how to do this if you're trying to do this in collaboration and include a lot of people. Because I got a lot of other questions like through the form on how to handle issues. So how do you avoid all teamwork issues? Any suggestions? Has anyone never had a challenge collaborating ever? If that's okay, tell us how you did this. Sometimes writing things down can help. I think we can get these situations. No, and so sometimes sending an email after a meeting, trying to summarize that can help. So, yeah, good. I actually use I like transcribe my meetings now. So I'm like, we can go back through the history and see what was correct. For the most part, it only does English very well. So I had a great time seeing its translation for a meeting that was in Spanish. Uh, but yeah, it can happen. So, okay, so writing down is a good start. What are some other ideas? Hmm. Yeah, move. I'll call this move forward for now to summarize that. Also, great. Also, I don't. Uh, it's like the opposite of basically how the government works, but we can get into that later. Where basically people's jobs are always just determined on like anyone happen to find a mistake. Okay, oh well. And that's maybe a reason why certain governments don't make a lot of progress because they're always worried about like the one mistake. Who cares? Okay, good. Great. So this is already getting to some of the points, but basically in a word, the one way to avoid a lot of teamwork issues, communicate. If you get past, if you still end up in an issue, great. Yeah, like what I was saying from Boris, just move forward. Who cares? And if people can't handle that, maybe they're not great teammates anyway. So don't worry about trying to collaborate with them very much. So, for example, if you're worried about authorship issues, I got a lot of questions for this through the forum. Communicate about it. In fact, I find like the best solution for this is like 2 months before the deadline. Let's work out who are going to be the author ordering on this paper. And it's way more productive that way too, because then you can get that initial investment like 2 months ahead of time. Like, okay, this is going to be those people's priority for that time. It's not like we're a few days away from the deadline. It's like, okay, we need to figure out who did the most work, especially after everyone's tired. Their perception of the universe is not really the same as it probably will be the next week after they go about things. It's much better to do this stuff as early as possible to figure it out. So communication definitely helps there. Because who should do what and what are the responsibilities? This should hopefully be clear every meeting because things will be communicated. It's great that I'm hearing a lot of good comments about like basically writing things down and documenting them. Also because I find that the issues that usually happen between these groups is the information is stored in people's minds and people's minds don't agree for whatever reason because they haven't talked about it in that detail or they forgot about it in some meeting. Writing it down forces people to start to agree. It's one of like the paramount important processes in research. I can't just like go to a research conference and wave my arms and talk to people. They're not going to believe me. I have to write down the words and they have to judge if those words are correct enough for what's actually been done. And even there can be some disagreement. Also, I can't just say like, see, I trust me, my thing is 10% better than yours. It's not how it works. It has to be written down and the code has to be shared as another form of writing. So basically 98% of the time, these things can be avoided if everyone spends a bit more time being proactive and communicating. And the other parts, I'd hope people can move forward pretty quick. Like just figure out, okay, we don't have time to figure out why this broke. Let's just figure out how to fix it and make it better. Again, it's kind of like living in the past, and that meeting schedule, I might as well plan for the future. Okay. Does that make sense? Let's cover at least some amount of teamwork issues. So going back to the relationship, we're having tried this and order of the others. I noticed that I can make much less if you know they're not going to respond to the second. So you can see how this can get less. Okay. Well, it's a tricky issue because in that case, I'm not implying anything, but is it also like you want people to work more without being able to give them first authorship? Is sort of like the other view on the situation. Yeah, I guess even the definition of like what is enough to be a first author should be communicated. So it's sort of like we agree to be first authors only if we like share the experiment time and stuff too. So don't just it's not just we'll be first authors and then like we can perfectly predict what's going to happen over the next 2 months. So sometimes there's a bit of social clarity that kind of implies what the authorship stuff means. And the fact that, okay, we'll actually split the work, not just that great, it's been given or something like that. So it needs to be maintained. So occasionally it could be good to discuss that, like figure out the plan and like here's a chunk for the whole plan for the paper. That's now someone's responsibility. And only if that's done in some way, then that sort of remains. So I still find that usually helps. So it's not perfect, although I've usually, in most cases, still found that okay. But if no one knows at any time if they're the first author, then no one does any work for the project. It's kind of the alternative. So you're figuring those two out. Okay, I'm gonna go skip through maybe a few things, and this is a bit tricky about like so. There's kind of two steps. You need to get everyone in the group basically on the same page, starting a meeting, and you want to discuss stuff. They don't always seem to have the same goal. So this could be because they've forgotten, or maybe they've got other goals in mind. So this is again, you need to spend more time in that planning stage. These things also emerge. I guess maybe what I'm trying to convey at this particular moment is not that we need to grow every team. This process also helps whether us figure out whether or not people should kind of like exit the team. Like, do you not agree with this anymore? Are you not actually going to help out on the project? You have other priorities. And if you write the goals and interests of that particular team down, then this also makes it clearer for people. And that stuff can definitely happen because maybe I don't know, maybe they just want to do language models for, I don't know, something really weird, whatever that would be. I don't know, tracking objects in space or, and it's just not of the interest of that particular group or team. And it's kind of a bit worse if they like go down this path for a while and everyone thought they were agreeing on an idea and put in a lot of time, and then that ends up being different. It's just trickier to deal with at that point. So write things down. Also, this is good for yourself, which I tend to remind myself of quite a bit. But like tomorrow, you're a different person. So remember, you are your own teammate first. Write down an idea, revisit it tomorrow, see if it's still a good idea, things like that. It's also why you do documentation because it's primarily for you, so you can revisit your code in a couple of weeks and you still know how it works. Okay, so I have a bit of time for this. If you get some time later, I saw a great presentation by Neil Bauer, is like the person who their job in the federal government was to figure out how to get all the departments to agree on things and come up with policies for the country. So almost the most difficult form of teamwork you can think of to try to get them to agree on anything. And the amount of time he probably wasted on that stuff was long, but he definitely had lots of successes in spite of all the challenges. But I recently saw a fantastic presentation, and basically he had a couple of diagrams, but I'll stick to this one, which is kind of like an hourglass, which is really small here. But basically, like the decision process for trying to get people on board, it kind of looks like this process where in the beginning, um, it's really small in there, and I'm actually going to pull up my phone because luckily for me, I forget because it's only been a couple of weeks because I'm a new person after not too long. Not teaching images. Okay, great. So basically, there's kind of like this policy making process where the beginning here is like we really want to think about the biggest ideas. Like how many things can we solve all at once? Taking in as many possible thoughts, as many things as you can possibly manage at those particular points. Uh, okay. And then for the opposite for this, great. And this is basically what research is. Where in this part, it's just sort of like accumulating the stuff together. What can you possibly solve? And then at some point, there'll be a bunch of different problems. And this is going to move down through this funnel. We're going to get to options. So this is now, all right, we've got a problem, whatever it might be. I don't know. We're going to try and figure out how to use RL to launch, I don't know, a cow across a river. Who knows? Something like that. So you're going to figure out all the different ways you can use RL, figure out different sizes of cows, whatever. And at some point, okay, the scope basically of the problem is defined, and then it's also defined who like gets interested in this problem and who can actually use it. And you get down to this level of options where now it's okay, what are the different ways this could possibly be solved? Because before it was just a problem. Like for some reason we've agreed on launching a cow across the river. It seems to be important from here. And usually in like policy space, this is like, okay, figure out how to tackle taxes or something like that. And because you want to be able to figure out how to split taxes more evenly, because that's obviously important and we'll see the benefits. And now we need options, like things that are actually possible. Because you can't just like go around whipping people to pay more taxes or something like that. You need policy options that are legal. And then here is, I guess, kind of where you start to do your more collaboration. This part ends up being advice. So you've got options. So I can be like, okay, do you think this option is reasonable? Is this actually going to work if we try to apply it in this particular like scenario? And you go between people and you're going back and forth with how you discuss a lot of the details. And then basically this really thin point is someone in some group makes some sort of uh, decision about the process. So now basically an option has been chosen. Sometimes this is the easier or harder part. And then after this has been chosen, what happens next after something has been chosen? We got to make it happen. And that's not always as easy as planned. So then basically all this stuff is implementation and then hopefully at some point some eval at the end. And the idea here is if for the teamwork part, you kind of need to keep the team involved in this whole process for them to be invested in going through all of this, the decisions and helping implement it. It's possible people get lost from the team along this whole process if they're not as interested. It always depends. Like even for me, I've got a lab. They're not all working on the same thing. And they've all got different interests. You've all got different interests. It just happens. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But does that make sense? This is kind of a way to try and get people to start to agree by including them in the research, considering options in a group, even for different people. Some basically advice from different people are trying to pull in before making the final decision. And then who's got the skills? I mean, this is kind of like, in our case, like the students do a lot of the stuff below the bottom here because it's mostly implementation for the most part. Okay, good. Because I've got a ton of stuff left, but no worried about it. Maybe just keep in mind that and a part of the concept of trying to keep, so there's basically the decision process where we've got an idea. The other part is kind of keeping people motivated to continue to work on these things, which is a different aspect of life. So we all agree on some particular goal. It's entirely different to get people to act on the goal. You know, like if you want people to agree on stuff and then you tell them, okay, I'll pay you $5 an hour for doing it or something like that. You're not motivating them very much. But if you tell them you pay them $1,000 to work on this thing, it's one way of motivating it or the impact from it. So this motivation is often something that needs to be crafted, and it should be crafted back more in like the research option stage for why people are interested in this and why it's important. Uh, and again, remember, work is done by people. So this is something definitely challenging to work with and to figure out how to keep people motivated. Uh, Maybe in the next one of these, I'll be able to talk about startups are uniquely crafty at doing this type of stuff to the point where it's tricky. Like they tend to try to craft an atmosphere of like, we can do this and it's awesome. And if we work together, it can be accomplished. And then if you're like one of the teammates that gets let go, it's actually very problematic for mental health because now it's like you used to have this drive and be on a team and it's tricky. So there's costs for doing different types of scenarios for trying to motivate people for doing things. So maybe watch out for those. Um, but the idea is you still have to care yourself, convince other people to care about doing stuff. In fact, if I would even go back to like asking questions for people and things like that, if you can convince them to care first, they'll definitely be interested in answering the question. It's just how people work. Like there are plenty of things they can end up doing, but uh, you'll get better information from people if they care about the topic more. And then maybe I'll probably do this as the very last thing is okay, just because it's fun and it's a bit mathematical. Oh shoot, don't have a lot of time. Okay, if this is uh, required knowledge, and we have to explain something to someone else or possibly to a group of people that could have different amounts of knowledge. I don't know, this is time still on the right. At what level should we explain things in order to keep as many people involved in the conversation and can contribute as possible? Should we like up here at really high knowledge because we all are graduate students? Mhm. Good. So this is like a start. Keep low required knowledge. You'll get most people on board in the room as well. Hmm. A bit of a mix. I wish I had a bit more time. Go ahead. Yeah. I mean, people do like talking about ugly details occasionally, though, especially as you get around technical people. So the one I'm going to suggest and what I'd usually suggest for most talks, if this is time while you're talking to a person, would actually be something like this. You cover everyone this way. They'll all be interested in at least 2 points in this whole process. So you can definitely start out on something that doesn't require a lot of knowledge. That way you can involve as many people as possible that might be interested in whatever you're talking about. And you can see how long you can carry them up this mountain, basically, with you as you're kind of integrating over the amount of knowledge that is needed. And at some point, like a lot of good research talks are given this way, you get down to the theory that maybe only a few people in the room will understand, but they only care about that stuff. Those other people, they don't care about the, I don't know, general motivations for things and all the other knowledge. So in this way, you get to cover a lot of stuff. It's kind of a bit mathematical. There's actually like another dimension on here for like the number, like the percentage of people that will at least take away information from what's being discussed and also find some appreciation for it. So it's not always like a perfectly shaped mountain, depending on what you want to cover. But I suppose in like a meeting or something like that, maybe you want this to be, like as quick as possible to get to those parts. And then maybe at the end, the to-dos, which don't require as much perfect knowledge. But it seems like if you want to talk about the details as much, you kind of need to have raise this up and cover a lot of things, but if you start immediately there, it's almost impossible to kind of like carry anyone along in that conversation. If it's like the, you know, what do you think of my French tutor conversation? That's some very specific required knowledge. It's not going to be helpful. So there's still, this can only go as high as other people in the room must at least have this knowledge as well. They can't get any more specific than that. Yeah. Does that make sense? I guess we kind of want to, in some ways, integrate on the area under the curve for this, but there's another dimension on like the number of people that you'd want to include on this during the discussion. Okay. I'm a bit over time. Maybe I've got other stuff to do. But yeah, I'll share this. There was just a few other things on like managing conflict and a couple other parts that'll end up being useful. But really, if you're in a conflict and you can't sort it out, oh well, they're not a very good team player. And it's just sometimes you can't always make everything work out perfectly. And I put a bunch of small references in here if you want to lead stuff. Oh yeah, shoot. Okay, I'll leave you with this last question you can think about for a while. What is the opposite of trust? And then maybe you can Slack me your thought process on that afterwards when you're trying to work out with people. I'll at least give you an answer. It is not lies. It is something very different. I happen to work with a lot of people who do research on trust between people and do a lot of this type of stuff. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week and weekend. Okay.